Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So, for this live stream, I'm going to talk about these executive orders that Donald Trump recently issued, and I'm going to talk about their impact on Black people and people of color. I did a prior video where I talked about how one of Trump's executive order pardons and grants clemency to those insurrectionists. And I encourage you all to check that out. When I get a chance, I will put that particular video on the card so you can easily access it for those of you who have not seen it. But for this video, I'm going to focus primarily on three of the executive orders. And I'm going to go through them one by one. I encourage you all to actually go to the White House website and read these executive orders for yourself. You know, the president on the first day in office, this man issued all of these executive orders that are very detrimental to people of color. And it's very important for people to be aware of what's going on. And it's a shame that many of our people actually just sat out this election or actually voted for this man. And that is something that I will never understand. I will never understand why any Black person in their right mind would vote for this man, because it makes absolutely no sense. It's absolutely ridiculous, given the fact that this man's whole agenda is anti-civil rights, anti-Black, on every single issue that matters. You know, when we're talking about, voting rights, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm going to go into a little bit more detail later on. But one of the executive orders that Donald Trump issued yesterday was this order. He issued an order ending, quote unquote, radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing. You know, those are the labels that, they use when they talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. As far as they're concerned, those are wasteful programs. They are radical programs. They are discriminatory programs in the minds of people like Donald Trump. So this is what his executive order says in part. It says, the director of the Office of Management and Budget shall coordinate the termination of all discriminatory programs, including illegal DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility mandates, policies, programs, preferences, and activities in the federal government under whatever name they appear. You know, to carry out this directive, it talks about how the Attorney General shall review and revise all existing federal employment practices, union contracts, and training policies or programs to comply with this order. And it goes into more detail about how, this man wants to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion programs when it comes to the federal government. And it's very important to note that this is not just about the federal government. You know, of course, Donald Trump's executive order applies to the federal government, but there are many states around the country that are following this man's example. You know, these right-wing Republican governors, yes, right-wing Republican governors are the ones implementing and enforcing DEI, anti-DEI measures around the country. Basically, they are reversing the clock of progress. They are going backwards to erode and destroy the rights that African Americans and gains that African Americans and other people of color have fought for in this country. That's what they're doing. They're trying to reverse those gains. And in light of that, I can't understand how any black person or any person of color, period, could have voted for this man and are actually making excuses for this man. I go on TikTok, and I see these goofy, uninformed, miseducated, and uneducated people all over social media, TikTok and other social media, actually defending this man. Defending a man that's trying to erode civil rights, defending a man that's trying to reverse the gains that our ancestors and elders and we have fought for. In their minds, they view the actual solutions to discrimination as forms of discrimination. They view efforts by institutions to end discrimination, through progressive measures. They view that as actual discrimination. In their minds, despite the history, they view white people as the victims, and they view black people as victimizers, and they view systems designed to bring about diversity as instruments of discrimination. They don't want to address systemic um, discrimination. They don't want to address the legacy of Jim Crow. Instead, what they want to do is blot out the history and gloss over the history and whitewash the history to give us some distorted version and revisionist version of history. They're trying to get rid of any lessons about actual American history and replace it with fairy tales and fables and alternative facts. That's what they're trying to do. They don't like seeing a black people in power. All of this anti-DEI efforts that you see around the country and you see in the White House are a response to black people gaining power, are a response to the election of the first black president, are a response to the election of many black officials in high positions like governors. Like here in Maryland, we have a black governor, our first black governor. We have our first black woman senator. And these right-wing fanatics, they don't like to see that. They don't like to see the advancement of black people. So they are lashing out at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what they're doing is they're essentially trying to protect a system of white supremacy. They are essentially trying to protect a good old boys network. They are essentially trying to protect, a system of white privilege. That's what they're doing. And at the end of the day, when they talk about making America great again, they're talking about making America white again. And I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail when I get into the provision dealing with citizenship and how they want to change the whole thing about naturalization when it comes to citizenship. So I'm going to get into that in a second. I want to shout out the people tuning in. Shout out to Ghost Rider. It's been a minute. I'm glad to see you here. I'm trying to get back on YouTube, get back to posting my content over here on a regular and more consistent basis. And I'm going to try to go live more often because I really enjoy the live interaction with the crowd in real time. So yeah, they're trying to reverse diversity and equity and inclusion, programs that benefit black people. And the sad thing is, you have these pseudo activists on social media. You have these pseudo intellectuals on social media. These divisive people on social media that are, instead of actually advocating for things that are in the interests of black people, they are doing everything in their power to undermine the interests of black people and low key some of these people are actual Trump supporters. I think that they are, because they had all this negative stuff to say about Kamala Harris, but they gave Donald Trump all kinds of passes. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these people were not on Donald Trump's payroll. So this is what happened when you had these people, quote unquote, you know, saying that they're going to sit out the election. This is the result that you get. You get somebody like Donald Trump that doesn't care nothing about your civil rights. These people talk about holding their vote. This is what happens when you, quote unquote, hold your vote. These people pretend like reparations is their priority, acting as if, getting somebody like Donald Trump elected is going to get you some kind of reparations when this man doesn't even want to give you diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the sad thing is, before I get to the next points, is that some of our people are pacified with crumbs. Some of our people are deceived by crumbs that this man has thrown to your feet. He's giving you, he's pardoned a few Black celebrities, and you think that that's actually doing something for Black people. While at the same time that he's issuing pardons for Black celebrities, this man is doing everything that he can do to undermine the Black community. When it comes to getting rid of affirmative action, appointing justices to the Supreme Court that tore down affirmative action, appointing justices to the Supreme Court that voted against your voting rights. This man opposed sensible reforms when it comes to policing in our communities. This man joked about police brutality, and now this man wants to give these police immunity to harass and brutalize Black people. That's what he wants to do. He wants to implement stop and frisk in Black communities. But yet and still, this is the man that some of these ignorant, uninformed, just outright stupid Black men actually voted for. So let's keep it moving. I'm going to go to the next executive order that has to be mentioned. And that's his executive order dealing with citizenship. Donald Trump is trying to redefine citizenship in this country. There was a time when Black people weren't considered to be citizens. Even though we have been here for generation after generation, we weren't considered to be citizens in this country. As was issued, I think it was the Dred Scott decision, where the Supreme Court basically said that the Black man has no rights that the white man is obligated to respect for the most part. No rights to citizenship or any of that stuff. And so the 14th Amendment was enacted, and it says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and are subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States in the state wherein they reside. People want to do this disconnect between, the plight of African Americans and the plight of immigrants, but there is a connection because they didn't view us as citizens either. Despite all of our hard work and labor, despite the fact that we were born in this country and lived in this country and our parents and grandparents were born here and toiled in this country and built this country off our sweat, blood, and tears, they didn't want to recognize us as citizens of this country. And so, the 14th Amendment was enacted. And under that 14th Amendment, if people are born in this country, they are citizens in this country. regardless of where they come from. But Donald Trump wants to redefine citizenship. He wants to say that the automatic, he wants to end, the automatic right to citizenship when people are born in this country uh, by limited, by basically saying that if that person's mother was unlawfully present in the United States and the father was not a citizen or a lawful permanent resident at the time, that child is not a naturalized citizen, even if they're born in the country to those parents. And also the situation when the person's mother's presence in the United States at the time of the birth was lawful but temporary, and the father was not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. And so this will take effect, from what I understand, it's 30 days from the issuance of, it says this section will only apply to persons born within the United States after 30 days from the date of this order. So it's not retroactive, it's going forward. So they're trying to redefine citizenship in this country so that, people from around the world who have children here, their children will not be American citizens if Trump has his way. And this just makes me think about all of those immigrants that actually voted for Donald Trump, all of those children of immigrants that actually voted for Donald Trump, despite all the anti-immigrant rhetoric, despite him calling Mexicans criminals and rapists, despite him talking about Haitians are eating the cats and eating the dogs and all this other stuff. Despite all this rhetoric about building that wall and, harsh treatment of immigrants, despite all of that, some immigrants and children of immigrants decide to vote for this man anyway. Despite all of that, thinking that somehow they were different, somehow Donald Trump was not talking about them, somehow they were the exceptional immigrant that Donald Trump was not talking about. Well, the truth of the matter is, Donald Trump was talking about you too. Donald Trump was talking about you. Because this is about fear. These Trump people and, the MAGA crowd, they don't want to see people of color in this country. When they say make America great again, they're really talking about making America white again. And Donald Trump's own statements prove this fact. Donald Trump said, he referred to African countries as shithole countries. He was complaining about African immigrants. And he said that we need to have more people from places like Norway, a predominantly white country. That's making it clear what this man wants. He doesn't want to see the browning of America. And that is the reason why Trump appeals to these white supremacists so much. That's why they love him so much. That's why he patronizes and panders to them, because they love this rhetoric, because they fear the browning of America. They don't want to see a country that's majority minority. They don't want to see that. They don't want to see a country with brown and black people in high numbers. They don't want to see that. So they're doing everything that they can to limit the number of people of color coming into this country. And it doesn't matter what kind of credentials you have. It doesn't matter at all. The thing that comes to mind is that Indian successful businessman, Vivek Ramaswamy. and excuse me if I'm mispronouncing his name, but that guy, he thought he was somehow exceptional. But Ann Coulter reminded him that she would never vote for somebody like him because he's Indian. And we saw that he didn't even get to start his first day on the job. He was fired before the Trump administration even took office. Fired before then. Despite all his credentials and all this and that, at the end of the day, he was just another racial slur as far as they were concerned. And that's just how they see you. You think, oh, he's not talking about me. He's talking about those bad immigrants. He's talking about those illegal immigrants. He's talking about those criminal immigrants. But no, he's talking about you because he doesn't want to see the browning of America. He wants to literally make America white again. So shout out to shout out to everyone in the chat. Shout out to Covina, man. Thanks for tuning in. But yeah, it's just a shame, man. When you look at the numbers of Hispanics that actually voted for Donald Trump, Latinos that voted for him, it was high percentages of them that voted for him. And now they're going to find out. They messed around and now they're about to find out. And it's an absolute disgrace. The other executive order that I want to talk about briefly is the executive order dealing with the death penalty. Donald Trump has decided that he wants to lift the moratorium on the death penalty, and he has directed that the Attorney General pursue the death penalty for all crimes of a severity demanding its use. And I want to talk about why this is a problem, why this is an issue for African Americans. But before I do that, I want to go back to that citizenship issue, because a lot of people will look at that as, oh, that's a Latino issue. But the fact of the matter is there are many Black immigrants in this country that are impacted by this type of law, this type of discriminatory law. There are immigrants from the Caribbean, from Africa, Black countries, that are Black immigrants from Black countries that are impacted by this particular executive order. And it's unfortunate that we have a divide and conquer type of mentality that's pervasive online, where you have these buffoons who call themselves FBA, and all they are is an anti-Black immigrant hate group. They have bought into this rhetoric. Instead of Black people pooling their resources and uniting as a collective, they have Black people divided and fighting each other, playing into the hands of our enemies. But I had to mention that before, I moved on, because, the fact of the matter is, despite all this anti-Black immigrant rhetoric that you hear on YouTube and elsewhere from these FBA and other people like ADOS, the fact of the matter is, many of those immigrants that you look down upon and criticize and all that kind of stuff have been with us side by side in our fight for Black liberation and Black empowerment. There are countless examples of Black immigrants, quote unquote, that have been at our side as we fought for Black liberation and civil rights. So let's get back into this death penalty issue. And I'm going to try to share my screen. It's been a while since I've used this. I may not be. Let's see. How do you? Let me see if I can share my screen. I may not be able to share my screen, but hopefully you all can still see me. I want to comment on this article. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to share my screen, I see. But maybe let me see if I can pull it up. Yeah, I'm going to just pull it up on my phone instead of pulling it up on the screen so that way I can see what's going on. There's this report, and I will link it. And it's done by the National Association of Criminal Defense Attorneys. And it goes into detail about the discrimination that's involved with the death penalty. It points out how Black and Hispanic groups represent 31% of the U.S. population, but 53% of death row inmates. The death row population is over 41% Black, even though Black people make up 13% of the U.S. population. It points out how a study in Washington State found that Black defendants are more than 4 times more likely to be sentenced to death than similarly situated non-Black defendants. And it says that in Louisiana, the odds of a death penalty sentence were 97% higher for those whose victims was white than those for whose victims were Black. So those are just some of the racial disparities involved with the death penalty. We know that there are plenty of innocent Black people who have been sentenced to death and they were later exonerated. And it wasn't too long, a few months ago, they killed a Black man. And I can't remember the brother's name off the top of my head, but I will post the name later in the comments to this video. But this brother, there were serious questions around his case over the last couple of months. But, they allowed the execution to go forward, even though there were serious questions around that. The fact that, mistakes happen regularly when it comes to the death penalty give me pause. That is enough for there to be a moratorium on the death penalty, because too many innocent people have been exonerated for people to continue to proceed with this death penalty. Because with a death penalty, after somebody's dead, it's too late to correct a mistake. And too often those mistakes happen at the expense of us, of Black people. So this matters. And the one thing that just comes to mind as I think about this particular executive order is Donald Trump, years ago, taking out a full-page ad calling for the death penalty against those brothers in New York, that were accused in the Central Park rape case. Those brothers were falsely charged and convicted. They were railroaded and they were forced to give up made-up confessions, and they ended up being sentenced. And if Donald Trump had his way, those young brothers would have been executed, even though they were innocent. So this stuff matters, man. And this is why elections are so very important. We are going to have a rough ride. This is going to be a gloomy time period. And we have to use our voices to oppose the nonsense. Unfortunately, we have, civil rights organizations that are fighting to defend the rights of the people. For instance, when Trump announced this executive order, basically ending naturalized citizenship in the United States, severely limiting it and redefining it, the ACLU brought a suit immediately to defend the people, because at this point, we're no longer going to be able to rely on the Justice Department, as some of my colleagues have pointed out. The Justice Department is going to be weaponized against the people. when the Justice Department before was used to defend voting rights, to defend, the rights of the people against police brutality. Now it's going to be used as a weapon against the people. It's going to be used as a weapon to further the erosion of our voting rights. That's the situation that we are living under right now. So for this troll in the comments, and I don't have time to actually go to your page, but I'm just wondering, like, what are you loving about Donald Trump? What are you loving about a man issuing pardons for insurrectionists, issuing pardons for racist groups like the Proud Boys? How is that starting out good? Issuing pardons for people that attacked police officers and raided the buildings of members of Congress. Now, this person is just talking nonsense. Prove anything that I said wrong. And actually, I'm not going to even waste my time engaging you. Because I don't think that those people are like people like that. I don't think they're even interested in a legitimate conversation because they don't rebut like arguments with actual counter substantive arguments. Instead, they just spew these goofy talking points. And I don't have time to entertain, trolls like that. So yeah, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I will be back on a more regular basis here on YouTube. And, if you're on TikTok, I encourage you to follow my TikTok page. I post, frequently over there, shorter videos than I usually post over here. So yeah, I encourage you all to check out my TikTok page. And I also encourage those of you who are interested in reading great books by great authors and who are interested in great discussions, I encourage you to like our book club Facebook page. It's called New Possibilities Book Club. And I will post a link to the latest invite. We will be reading and discussing Things Fall Apart. And that will be this coming Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be going, we'll also be on Zoom, and it will be in person as well. And that will be at the Baltimore County Public Library, located at 320 York Road in Towson, Maryland. All of this information will be included in the invite. So I hope to see you there. And for those of you who are watching this later and not watching it live, I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts about these executive orders that have been issued. So with that, peace and blessings. Have a great evening. Good night.